Hey everyone, today we're going to watch and react to an interview Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, gave to Harvard Business Review on agility, AI strategy, and the changing role of managers. Before I get started, I just want to say a couple of things. One, I don't know a lot about Andy Jassy. This will be the first interview of him that I see. And two, I think he has a difficult job. And by difficult job, I mean to be the second act in one of these tech giants in Silicon Valley. John Scully followed Steve Jobs. Didn't go that well. Steve Ballmer followed Bill Gates. Didn't go that well. It's not easy to be the second leader of one of these companies following the founder. So I'm actually very curious about what he has to say and how he plans to keep Amazon growing and relevant.
You've said that you want Amazon to operate like a startup, like a very large startup, and a lot of CEOs say that. And I'm interested, how do you try to make that happen? You're an enormous company with a lot going on. How do you try to make that work?
Yeah, well, we talk about first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. We talk about wanting to operate like the world's largest startup, and I actually think Amazon already, based on our DNA and the way that we have become a company over the last 30 years, moves very quickly. But when you get larger, there are all sorts of ways that, natural ways that you can get slowed down. And so when we talk about operating like the world's largest startup, we think about a few things. One is, I think in whatever we build, whatever we spend resources on, we have to make sure we're solving a real customer problem. And I think a lot of companies, technology companies in particular, fall in love with the technology, and they are building things that they think are cool because they love the technology, but they get to the end and they haven't really solved anything remarkable. And so startups are missionary about trying to solve problems for customers. And that's what we got to make sure we spend our time on. And then we need a lot of builders, disproportionately so. And I think of builders as people that like to invent, people that like to dissect a customer experience and figure out what's wrong with it, even if it's pretty good, and then rebuild it. And then, you need owners if you're going to be a startup. You need people who think about, what would I do if this were my money? What would I do if I owned all the resources? Hey, I see that I own this piece of the problem. I don't really know if the rest of it's solved. Should I spend my time on it, or should I just assume someone's got it? You need people who really feel.
So I'm just going to stop him for a second because I don't want to let too much of it accumulate. So far, I agree with everything he's saying, but at the same time, he's not saying much, right? He's just making very general statements that you need to be customer-centric and you want owners and builders and you want accountability. Obviously, that's true. Everybody wants that. The real question is, how do you achieve that in the case of a huge company like Amazon? Let's see what he has to say next.
Accountable. It's part of what our effort in trying to flatten our organizations is about, is we want the people doing the work to think like owners. And then you really need speed. And I think speed disproportionately matters in every business at every time.
I really agree with this. Speed is a virtue in itself, and I think in vast majority of the situation, it really pays to try to be speedy. What do I mean by speedy? I mean that the way in which you think about what you want to do and the way in which you plan your work, and that in a company is part of the company culture, determines how you're going to do it. Let me give you a very simple example. If I say to myself now that this weekend I want to have the perfect run. I like to run, I like to jog in the forest. I want to have the perfect run. If I say that to myself, my mind immediately is going to go to overthinking the problem, like what exactly is the perfect run, and I'm going to start Googling, and I'm going to get an idea, and then I'm going to get another idea which is going to seem better than the first idea, but then I'm going to change my mind again and think that maybe the first idea was better. I'm going to spend a lot of time just thinking, what is this perfect run? And then I'm going to set aside a long time for it, and more likely than not, I'm going to do something and then I'm going to be disappointed because it's not going to feel like the perfect run. But if I say to myself, I have an hour for a run in a particular place that I already know, and that's what I have, then I will plan my run for that, and I will run for an hour, and I will know exactly what I have to do, and I will get something done. And when we say speed in a business context, this is what we mean. It doesn't mean just kind of typing fast and rushing. It means planning your work in time-boxed intervals. So you don't set out to solve these, oh, let's look at this big problem, all of it at the same time, and I'm going to brainstorm forever and think forever and be perfectionist and over-engineer and overthink things. But instead you choose a smaller, more tangible objective. You set yourself a deadline for it, you get it done, you move to the next thing, you get it done, you move to the next thing. And I think that is almost always the best way to go about it.
My old job, when I was managing the AWS business, I had the privilege of speaking to a lot of CEOs of companies and enterprises. And they would often say to me something like, I don't know if you understand, like we're big, we have security issues, we have compliance issues, we have lots of organizations that have to be involved. We just can't move fast. And I think honestly that speed is a leadership decision. You can decide you want to move fast, but you have to kind of figure out what's slowing you down and knock all those barriers out. And you got to get the whole organization aligned that you are going to move really fast, even if you make mistakes.
I think what he's saying is correct, but at the same time, he's missing the key point, in my opinion. Now, the key point is that it's not just a leadership decision. Of course, it has to be a leadership decision, and the leadership has to be convinced and united behind this idea that we want speed. But leadership typically cannot do that. And let me explain. What is a speedy decision? What does it mean to move fast inside a big company? Well, it means for the people in charge, starting with the CEO and all the other senior managers, to make fast decisions. Whenever they analyze a problem, whenever they have to decide a direction, whenever they have to decide what initiative they support, they have to decide quickly and decisively. So they will consult a few people, they will analyze the data, they will weigh a few opinions, but relatively quickly they have to say, that's the way we're going. Decisively. This is speed from the point of view of leadership decisions. What happens when you make decisions like this? What happens is that you shortcut the bureaucracy, right? You don't spend the time consulting everyone who might want to be consulted. You don't spend the time organizing 15 different commissions to analyze the data in 15 different ways. You don't spend the time to cross every T and dot every I. You're shortcutting the bureaucracy. And this is taking a leadership risk, a political risk in terms of corporate politics. Because you're saying, let's do this. And if it doesn't work out, like Andy says, even if you make mistakes, then everybody's going to say, hey, we told you so. You were reckless, you rushed, you did not consult the bureaucracy, you did not follow the process, and now you've made a mistake. And this is where we get into what I was saying at the very beginning. Someone like Steve Jobs definitely has the moral authority and the actual authority to make a decision like this. Let's go that way. And if he gets it wrong, doesn't matter, he's Steve Jobs. Someone like Jeff Bezos definitely has the authority to make a decision like that. And if he gets it wrong once in a while, doesn't matter, he's Jeff Bezos. Someone like Andy Jassy, I think, has some of that authority. He's part of the original gang. He has, a reputation. He's the second CEO of the company. But most large organizations, we're talking about 5th, 7th, 6th, 7th, 10th, 15th generations of CEO from the founder. They have nothing in common with the founder. They're not a major shareholder. They're just a hired manager. The board hires them to increase profits. Those kinds of CEOs have nothing like the authority required to just decide big things by ignoring the bureaucracy. They are way less powerful than you would think. And that's the major problem. And that's the thing that's worth understanding how to change and how to fix and how to address. So when he's saying you just need to want to be fast, no, that's not enough.
And so I think, part of that too, as you're a larger company, as you have more people, is you need to really try to root out bureaucracy. Well-intended people, as you get bigger, especially as you have a lot of managers, they keep layering in processes, and pretty soon you have process upon process upon process that really slows people down, so they can't get the real work done. And then I would say the two other things you need if you want.
That's a very good point about people, well-intended people creating bureaucracies, because that's how bureaucracy and complexity, over-complexity, unnecessary complexity comes to exist. How do people, well-intended, motivated people, because if they're not, it's even worse, but let's assume the best case scenario, as the company grows, you add well-intended, motivated people. How do they add value? How do they contribute with the best of intentions? Well, they contribute by putting something on the table, by adding something, by coming and saying, hey, I've added a feature to the product. I've added an internal process so we avoid whatever confusion. I've created a checklist that we can follow in a certain situation so we're sure not to miss whatever. Everybody puts something on the table with good intentions. And taken in isolation, every one of these things makes sense, is logical, and you tend to say, okay, let's do that. It's a good idea. But all of them together, pretty soon are going to add up to unmanageable complexity, to bureaucracy. And then a bit more time passes, and the bureaucracy has a way of finding a life of its own, and it starts to exist for its own benefit, and it's like a self-feeding, self-perpetuating mechanism. So bureaucracy is built one good intention at a time. I totally agree with that.
Like a startup is you got to be scrappy. You can't think about every new project taking 50 to 100 people to do. We started in our cloud computing business, AWS, our storage service, we had 11 people or 13 people when we started. Our compute service, EC2, we had 11 people. You can get going with a small number of people and build something that people actually find resonant, and then to keep iterating from there. And then I think you got to nail. You have to be willing to take risks. And I think that as companies get bigger, they often get very risk adverse. If you hire achievement-oriented type A people, which a lot of companies, including ourselves, have, they're not used to failing. And so a lot of times when they want to pursue something very different, they worry that they're going to be ostracized if they get it wrong. And so they'll play not to lose.
I think he's right here, but I don't think he is answering the question of how. How do you keep that phenomenon that he mentioned, and I also agreed with, of bureaucracy being the result of a series of good intentions? How do you stop that from happening? He mentions doing things with small teams. You don't need a big budget or a big team for everything. I think that's part of the answer. Amazon famously has that expression of a 2-pizza team. If you can't feed the team with 2 pizzas, then the team is too large. Keeping a team small is a big part of it, but it's just a part of it. Let's see if he has anything else to add.
The only way to build something unique and different is to do something different from what people have done, and you have to be willing to take risks and be willing to fail sometimes.
So there's lots to unpack there.
He doesn't say anything else. Let's see the next question.
When you talk about really being customer focused or focusing on, an outcome that your customers have, that sounds like it might not necessarily be consistent with taking risks. If you knew exactly what your customers want, you would deliver that, and that's not risky. You're probably trying to skate ahead and figure out what are demands that customers don't even know they have yet. That's part of the risk taking. So how do you square those two things?
I think they're actually pretty consistent, though. I mean, there's listening to customers. Actually, if you find the right feedback loops, customers will tell you what's wrong with your product or what's wrong with their experience and they want to change. So there's listening to customers, and oftentimes customers can tell you the top 10 things in their mind they wish they were different. But if you ask the right why questions and what you're trying to solve, a lot of times customers will tell you what really is bothering them, what's really constraining them. And they can't sometimes tell you exactly how you should fix it. But if you're listening to them and you understand the need, then you can invent on their behalf, which is a lot of what we do. A lot of the invention we do is listening to something customers are really struggling with, and they won't tell you how to do it, but we start asking ourselves, why do those constraints have to happen, and start to invent on their behalf.
So
I think he missed the point with this question. So the answer he gave is, I don't think it is a relevant answer. Basically, what we're talking about here is the innovator's dilemma. And how do we distinguish between sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation? And let's take an example. Let's say you're a car company, and for the past 100 years, you've built internal combustion engine cars. And every few years, you come up with a new generation, a new model, which is incrementally better in some ways. Those new generations are examples of sustaining innovation. You have basically the same product, but you make it every time a little bit faster, a little bit more reliable, a little bit more feature rich, etc. For this kind of innovation, you should be listening to your customers very closely. You should spend a lot of effort to make sure you are in contact with your clients, that you know what they want, you know what they dream of, you know what their pain points are, you understand exactly how they use your product and what they would like to see in your product. And you listen to your customers. But once in a while, we have something which is called a disruptive innovation. And in this example, it will be something like the electric car. And the initial generations of the electric car, if you go and ask your existing customer base, what do you think about this new kind of car, the electric car? What they will tell you is that they don't like it. It will have horrible range. It will be very difficult to charge it. There will not be many charging points. Maybe it doesn't look good. There's not enough variety. And it has none of the the history and the culture and the tradition they associate with the existing models that they're using. So your existing customer base is going to tell you that the disruptive innovation is bad, it's not good, it's not what they want. Instead, you should keep improving the existing product, the product they know, the product they love. And the idea here is that initially, at least, the people that are going to buy the disruptive innovation, in this case, the electric car, it's actually a new customer base. Other types of customers which are looking for completely other types of things, of characteristics in a car than your existing customers are looking in the existing product. So you have a new disruptive innovation and you have to find a new market, a new customer. In time, of course, as that gets better as well, the things kind of merge. But in the initial part, it's very easy to miss disruptive innovations because your existing customers are going to tell you that they don't want it. So you have to distinguish between sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation, and you have to know when to listen to your customers and when to ignore your customers. And he completely misses the disruptive innovation part of the equation.
Seem to be in the middle of what is either rethink in terms of management or maybe culture. So, some of the things I'm aware of, you're rethinking the role of middle management. You've adjusted expectations for how teams are meant to work together. You've got people back in the office, I think, all of them 5 days a week now. What animates, what's behind all of these steps?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is most companies that have been successful for any period of time have a culture that's been a key part of their success. And that is for sure true with Amazon. And I think we have a really strong culture, but it is not our birthright to keep having a strong culture. You have to, things change, the size of companies change, the scope of businesses you're going after change, the geographic distribution of your people change. And you have to keep working on strengthening the parts of your culture that you see being stretched if you want to keep being successful culturally. And for us, it comes back to this notion of wanting to operate like the world's largest startup. Amazon has hired really smart, really ambitious, really motivated people who we have given a lot of responsibility to as owners, and then we let them make the lion's share of the two-way door decisions. A two-way door decision is one where if you walk through it and you're wrong, you can walk back through it and no harm. A one-way door decision is when you walk through that door and you're wrong, it's really hard to walk it back. But the two-way door decisions, which is the overwhelming majority of the decisions we all make, we want to be handled by the people doing the work and those owners. But as you get larger, as we've grown so much the last 10 years, you end up logically with a lot of managers and a lot of layers of managers. It's the way you organize yourself. And so then you find that you end up with things like there's a pre-meeting for the pre-meeting for the pre-meeting for the decision meeting. Or you find that owners don't feel like they own the decision, can make the recommendation anymore because that decision is going to be made 3 levels up. And so that's what we'd like to try and limit. We really want our owners doing the real work to own the two-way door decisions and to be able to move quickly and autonomously. And that's part of this effort we've taken, which is to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% across the company, which will be we have beaten already by the end of the first quarter. But we want to flatten our organizations to move faster and to drive more ownership. The other thing we noticed.
So he's kind of talking at the same time about flattening the organizations and bringing people back to the office as opposed to allowing remote work, because Amazon famously mandated that everyone returns to the office 5 days a week. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. I think that's what they did earlier this year. But let's address the flattening of the organization point first, and I'll talk about the work from home versus remote versus office work after he finishes his answer, because I think that's a more interesting answer. Flattening the organization, having fewer managers, fewer layers, is in 95% of the cases a good thing. Most companies could use a flatter organization. Most companies could use fewer managers and or better managers, of course. However, it's not one of those things that you can push to infinity and say you always want a flatter organizations. There have been companies, one of them actually Zappos, which is owned by Amazon. They bought it more than 10 years ago, so I think it's fully integrated now. But back then, Zappos, when it was an independent company, and even when it was initially part of Amazon, it was kind of independent. The founder and CEO of Zappos, I forget his name, did an experiment, a radical experiment in organizing the company after a set of rules called holacracy, which is kind of a radical flat organization approach. There were literally no managers, 0 managers. All teams were self-organizing, self-forming, all decisions were made at the team level, and everything was very decentralized and very almost 0 hierarchy. And it didn't go out well. It didn't really work. I mean, it's a very interesting approach. Philosophically, it's fascinating to think about that. It sounds very romantic, it sounds very inspiring, but it didn't really work. Those kinds of experiments, I don't want to talk too much about those because that can be a video in itself. It's a whole very interesting area. Have had success for some companies, but it's not that simple as saying we just don't want any managers and everything is just going to be great. It's not that simple, is what I want to say. So when he says flatten the organization, largely I agree, but there's a sweet spot. But let's let him continue and talk more about work from home versus work from the office.
Is that when we brought, like most companies, people were largely working remote. And when we brought people back to the office 3 days a week in May of 23, we noticed that a lot of things about how we were inventing and how we were collaborating got better. And if you do a lot of inventing like we do, and our style of invention is often very collaborative. We're in meetings together, we're iterating with one another, that when you're together, that invention is stronger. What you find is people riff on top of each other's ideas better if they're together. Turns out sometimes it's actually useful to interrupt each other because you get to a faster spot more quickly. You feel that energy. A lot of our best inventions have been after really messy, wandering meetings when we've been trying to invent something where we haven't quite gotten there and we've resolved ourselves to go have another meeting in a few days to figure it out. And then 3 people stay behind on a whiteboard and actually map out what it was they couldn't figure out, or on the way back to their office, they figure it out, or later in the day, they walk by each other's offices. When you're remote, it just like the meeting ends and you're on to the next jingle on the next meeting, and you just don't find that type of invention together. I also think if you want to teach the culture, it's much harder to see it when you're remote. You have a lot of people who are lurking off camera, or if they're on camera, they look like they're looking at the camera, but they're also working on a spreadsheet. And when you're in a meeting together and you're watching the body language and you're watching people's expressions, you internalize the culture much better. I think also the teaching and the apprenticeship is much better if you can walk over to somebody, or after a meeting. Sometimes it's a hard meeting and I may say, Adi, like, don't be surprised that was a hard meeting. This is a really difficult topic. And next time when you come back, think about these 3 things. You just don't end up doing those as much when you're remote. And so we realized that we were much better for customers and for the business if we were together.
A lot of the data.
So this is, on one hand, I agree with everything he's saying. Every point he made is a valid point. He didn't say anything stupid. I particularly agree with the culture building aspect of things. It's very, 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 very difficult to build culture exclusively remotely, especially at their scale. So I think he's saying good things, but I also think he's missing an entire other side of the coin. And let me break it down and explain what I'm saying. He's talking about a certain kind of work. He's talking about, like he said, jumping from meeting to meeting. And in those meetings, you have to brainstorm and decide things, and it's just always conversation and meetings and decisions and conversations and meetings and decisions. This kind of work is very specific to very senior people. Senior managers like himself, but not only, a lot of senior managers and very senior technical people as well, their job ends up consisting of practically only meetings. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Let's assume they're all good, relevant meetings, but their job consists of practically only meetings. Some of the meetings are bigger, some are smaller, some are more formal, some are less formal, but pretty much all they do is talk to people. When you have that kind of a job, and you have 8 meetings in a day, and you have to make 8 important decisions, yes, it really, really helps to be in the same room with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people, and together brainstorm that decision and make a fast, decisive decision. But I think that most people's job is not like that. I think most people in a large company, in Amazon including, I don't have any first-hand knowledge of Amazon, but I can extrapolate, their day doesn't look like that. They don't jump from meeting to meeting to meeting. I imagine that the average software developer, to take an example, in Amazon, maybe has a couple of quick meetings in the morning, like 10-minute kind of meetings with their team to synchronize, and maybe has 1 or 2 meetings throughout the day because some team member has a question or they need to clarify a technical thing. But I would hope that 80% of their time, they actually write code. And a lot of people, for that kind of work, they actually prefer uninterrupted focus time so they can do the work they have to do. Also, most managers, most leaders tend to be extroverts as a personality trait. And this happens because extroverts self-select themselves for leadership positions. Extroverts are exactly the kind of people who like to collaborate with other people on anything. If an extrovert is thinking what phone they should buy, how do they answer this question for themselves? They don't Google, they don't ask ChatGPT, they don't do research. They start asking around, hey, what phone do you have? What phone do you have? Are you happy? Are you not happy? Would you think I should get it? And so on and so on. The way extroverts solve problems is by talking about those problems with other people. They talk as they think, and they think as they talk, and it's a very collaborative way of getting things done. And this is easy for them. They prefer this. It fills them with energy. And if they could talk all day to all kinds of people, that would be a great day for them. Most engineering type of personalities, according to various statistics, but if not most, at least half, but typically more than half in engineering type of positions, are introverts. Introverted people are very different in how they prefer to work. They can communicate very well and they can interact with other people, but that interaction for them is tiring and it defocuses them. So they prefer to interact. They go to the meeting, they get the information, they ask the questions, they debate, but then they take their piece of work. And for the actual work, they prefer to work by themselves, uninterrupted, deep focus, deep work. And I think Andy is making a mistake here in the sense that he's thinking about the kind of work that he does, and he's thinking about the kind of personality that he has, and probably most of the people around him have. So if we're talking about extroverted managers, extroverted leaders, yes, which jump from meeting to meeting and have to brainstorm and decide thing and make decision after decision after decision, then what he says is 100% correct. But I think most people, more than half of the workforce, I think it's not like that. Not in their personality and not in the nature of their work. And they would prefer to work from home, where they have a very comfortable environment, where nobody's bothering them, and they would prefer not to spend a couple of hours commuting and get stressed and spend money to get into an office in one of those horrible open spaces where people always make more noise than you want, and the only escape is to have headsets on your head. And John from across the aisle is going to at some point come and say hi and interrupt you because he thinks he has a great idea. But more often than not, it's not a great idea. It's not even relevant. And you would really prefer to be left alone. Because there's been some studies made at some point that when you interrupt someone from deep work, what is deep work? You're working on something and you're kind of fully focused on it. You're not multitasking. You're not chatting at the same time. You got some numbers in your head. You're examining options. You're working. And someone interrupts you even just for a few seconds to ask you, hey, what's the time? And you take a look at your watch and you answer. It's going to take you 13 minutes on average to get started again, get to the same speed again, to get fully focused again. So you can imagine just a small number of minor interruptions in a given day is going to significantly impact the productivity of someone who has to do deep work. Not to mention that it's very stressful for them if they want to get something done, and especially if they're introverts as well. So I think most people, if you let them decide, they would choose a hybrid working style where they would try, for example, to come on Mondays to the office, and as a team they would collectively try to put as many of the important meetings on Monday. So Monday is kind of like the planning day. I'm simplifying things, just give an example. And they're face-to-face, they're in the office, they brainstorm things. But then for the rest of the week, they work from home, they have a minimum of meetings, and they focus. So I think what he's saying is not wrong, but he's missing this entire other side of the coin. Now let me see what follows, because I don't want to react to the whole video because we're going to be here for a couple of hours. I'm not that interested in tech stack. I'm not interested at all in AI. I have nothing against AI, but too much conversations about AI. I'm not going to get into that right now. Let's see a societal impact and the risks of AI. Let's just look at this one. What is 21st century leadership? Well, let's look at the uncertainty as well. Let's look at these last two questions.
More than most of more than more thing, and I think every
Empowering, but we got to make sure that our education keeps up so that people are successful in this new economy.
So I want to talk a little bit about sort of leadership at a higher level. You talked about how AI is reshaping everything, and I think every CEO is feeling that. It's an opportunity, it's a risk, it could be disruptive, it could be a lot of things. And then you have kind of political and geopolitical uncertainty that is, probably more than most of us have lived through before. How do you manage through that level of uncertainty, or what's your advice to people who are wrestling with how in the world do you manage through all of this?
Well, again, I don't pretend to have the perfect answer, but I think the first thing is really trying to, there are a lot of things happening in the world right now, across the world, in our country, and they can be dizzying. And I think just acknowledging that there's a lot going on, but you can't control everything. You can only control the things that you can control. And then remembering what matters most. And the thing that we keep telling ourselves inside the company as we look at the different things happening is that at the end of the day, we're here to make customers' lives easier and better every day. And you can get distracted by, are there going to be tariffs? How high are the tariffs? Are there not going to be tariffs? What do other countries' relationships look like with these countries? You can kind of, but at the end of the day, we have a job to do, which is to figure out what customers want and then to go deliver it for them. And so in every one of our businesses, there are so many areas where we can be even better for customers, and that's what we try to spend our time on. I think it's not easy because well-intended, passionate, mission-focused people read or hear about things and wonder how it's going to affect them. And sometimes when it does, you have to figure out how you're going to operate. But I think by and large, if you stay focused on the issues customers care about, you will do right by your customers. And you just will start at a much higher starting spot rather than having to do every little bit of early stage work yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's a great answer. And I think the way I see that is from a psychological point of view. And it's about a concept called locus of control. So evolutionarily, biologically, we have not evolved for the world we're currently living in. We have evolved for something different. The world has changed so much in the past few hundred years, but from a biological point of view, we haven't changed almost at all because evolution is so much slower. So we as human beings have evolved to live in small groups of dozens or a few hundreds of people in our little tribe or our little village. And at that scale, we can comprehend what's happening. We're kind of aware of the important things happening in our little tribe and the important people and how they are and what they think and what's likely to happen tomorrow or the week after. We don't really know what's happening anywhere else in the world, other than maybe our neighbors across the hill, but not much more than that. At this scale, our mind can comprehend and keep track of things. And more importantly than comprehending, we can do something about it. Because in our little community, if we think something is wrong, or we have a different opinion, or we have a different idea, or we want to try something, it's very easy to act. Now, we may succeed, we may not succeed, others may agree with us or not. But in terms of what can I do about it, the answer is very simple. Well, you go and talk to that person, which you already know, or you try to do things in your backyard, or whatever. It's very simple to act on the information that you're receiving. Fast forward to today's world, what do we have? We are connected to everything, everywhere, all at once. Through the internet and social media, we kind of doom scrolling and deep diving into any topic you want from any part of the world. So constantly we are aware, if we want to be aware, about everything. And partially because there's a lot of bad things happening in the world, but also partially because that's how the algorithms work, and they promote the extremes because those are more viral. We tend to see a lot of worrying things, a lot of bad things, and the more we click on them, the more the algorithm shows us similar things. So what do we have? We have a mind which is aware of everything happening in the world, but can do nothing about it. Literally zero agency. Whatever happens anywhere else except in your little community, in your team, you have zero things you can do about it. So we have this huge asymmetry in which we are aware of everything and we can change nothing. And this is very, very psychologically taxing. It can be hugely detrimental to your mind, to your mental sanity, to your mental health. And what Andy is saying, which is, yeah, it's good to be aware of things, but just focus on what you can do. Take it one step at a time and do the things that are within your power, is exactly the right way to approach it. So I think this is a great answer.
Period, and HBR was absolutely part of it. A couple of years ago, where at places like Davos and again in our pages, good leadership was defined as thinking broadly about stakeholders, thinking about things like sustainability and diversity and long-term thinking and all these things.
And I am so glad we're over that bullshit, and this guy is talking about Davos and how we defined good leadership and as thinking about sustainability and diversity. I'm so over that. I am not watching an interview of Andy Jassy or anyone so they can tell me what they think about sustainability and the planet and social justice. I want to hear how he's going to keep Amazon nimble. I want to hear how he flattens the organization. I want to hear how he organizes a meeting and all the other things he talked about and more. That's the kind of leadership I want to hear about. And this political BS this guy is talking about, I am so glad we're finally over that.
Has that changed? I mean, the conversation seems to, or the noise seems to have changed around it. But, do you think is the definition of successful 21st century leadership sort of evolving at this moment, or what is the role of a 21st century?
I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, to be in my opinion, to be a great leader of a significant company, there is no one definition, and there are different things happening at each time that matter. But at the end of the day, I think you have to deliver great customer experiences for whoever you're trying to serve with successful financial results.
Who would have thought the job of a leader is to deliver good products and good services and make money for the company? Who would have thought?
I think there have been times over the last few years where maybe one issue or a different issue gets disproportionate attention. And I think the reason that those issues get disproportionate attention is that there's work to be done. We're not in the right spot. In my opinion, we're still not in the right spot in terms of where we need the environment to be. I still think we want more diverse teams. None of that has changed. There are certain times where that takes up more of the conversation than at other times. But it is true, in my opinion, at the end of the day, as a leader, you have to have the right customer experience with the right results to match it, and then all the other pieces are parts of it.
So last question.
Yeah, he does pay a little bit of lip service to we think about that kind of stuff as well, but I'm so happy that he brings it down to what I think people need to focus on. And it's very, if you think about it, it's kind of related to the previous question. The question which was about, there's all these things happening in the world, how do you keep focus? When I was talking about how we evolved and locus of control. It's the same kind of thing. A business leader, if they're trying to fix all of the world problems according to whatever understanding, they're going to end up fixing nothing. So you have to focus what's under your control. And a business leader is going to focus on the performance of the business, on the performance and the quality and the well-being of the workforce, on the satisfaction of the customers. It's not their job to fix the world, other than maybe indirectly by coming out with great products, but their job is to have a great business. So that's what he should be focusing on. What he does in his free time, when he's Andy Jassy, the individual, when he's off work, and I don't know, maybe he's donating to causes or he's involved in other things, that's absolutely his choice. But Andy Jassy, the CEO, I totally agree with him, should keep his eye on the ball, and the ball is great employees, great services, great products, happy customers.
As you said, you've been at Amazon for 28 years. You've been in the CEO role for 4. What's your best bit of career advice for the HBR audience?
First, I would pick something that you're either really passionate about or that you think you're going to be good at, and you're convicted you could be good at to work on. Because we all spend so many of our waking hours working. So you want to work on something you like and that makes you feel good about yourself. Pick things that you're really passionate about, that you believe you're going to be good at and want to come to work every day doing. You just can't be terrified of failure. And I think, and by the way, I made mistakes in this area many times. I felt like almost every stage of my career, as I got to new audiences who I felt didn't know me, or know me well, that every time I got in front of them was like a pass-fail referendum on my competence. And it's just not, A, it's not helpful, and B, it's not how most people think of you who are working with you. And I would say that almost every most important lesson I learned in my career was from failure, or things that didn't go right. And if you are self-reflective and learn from them, it catapults you. And then I think the last thing would be, I think an embarrassing amount of how successful you are is attitude. Mm-hmm. And I always tell my kids this. I don't think they really believe me, but it is absolutely true in my opinion. I think simple things you can control. Do you work hard? Are you reliable? Do you get done what you said you would get done? Do you tell people if there's going to be an issue? Do you want to be part of a team? Are you a can-do person versus a naysayer all the time? All those things change how people receive you and how much they want to advocate for you and how much they want to work with you. And I think another...
I'm just going to pause. He's almost done, but I'm just going to pause because I think he is so right about this last part. He's just so right. You would imagine that in today's world, in 2025, we have so many things, and we got AI, and we got this, and we got the other thing. You would imagine that we've learned mostly to overcome these basics, such as telling people what you're going to do and when, and then doing what you said. And if something happens, well, sometimes it will, because we're all human and we make mistakes and shit happens. If something happens and if something changes, you say, hey, there's been a problem, there's been a change, let's talk. These very simple things that you would imagine that everyone has mastered in the year of the Lord 2025, it's actually the opposite from that. They are still in short supply, and you would not imagine how many highly educated, highly important people in important position in companies still lack these fundamentals, and how refreshing and good and easy and productive it is to work with people who have these qualities. And in my mind, if you have a person who behaves like this and has this kind of a good attitude, I would choose them over a person who is significantly more experienced but has a bad attitude in almost all situations. Let's see how he finishes his answer.
That is how good a learner you are. What I notice is that at a certain point of people's careers, for a lot of people, they just seem threatened by having to learn again. I don't know if it's because it's a lot of work to feel like you have to keep learning, or if you get to a certain point of seniority where you think I shouldn't have to learn, or it's a sign of weakness that you don't know everything. But if you work in a dynamic environment, which hopefully most people do, the second the second you stop learning really is the second you're starting to unwind. I think back every 6 months, and there's so much that I've learned. And that is really what changes your capacity and what people are going to let you do. And I think your own enjoyment.
All right, Andy, this is amazing. Thank you very much for.
I also think this learning point is really important, and I want to clarify, what does it mean to be a continuous learner, in my opinion? How do we keep learning and never stop learning? And it's not primarily about going to courses or taking classes or doing those kinds of things. Also, those kinds of things have their value, and we should do them when they make sense. But mostly it's about your mindset and how you approach every situation, every conversation, every meeting, every decision, every interaction. If you go into it with arrogance, thinking you already know everything, then you're going to learn nothing. You're going to be arrogant. You're going to not be able to really understand what other people are saying. You're going to jump to conclusions, and you're going to come out of that conversation, of that situation, having learned nothing new. But if you go with humility, and if you go into a situation thinking that, yes, I know some things, I have some opinions, but maybe other people know other things, and maybe there's better ways of doing it, and maybe I don't have the full picture, and you actually listen to people, and you actually are curious when you examine a problem and when you're trying to find out a solution, then you're going to learn something from anything. From every little interaction, from every person you meet, you're going to be able to learn something, to take something out of that. And that's how you continuously learn, no matter what you do. And that's how you continuously get better every day. See ya, guys.